Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org.
Grand Canyon website?
Recording just started, so now you're good to go.
Okay, and you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Good. All right, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Let me just click something to get rid of the window. It's not blocking me. So you know how when you first meet somebody for the first time, and somebody introduces you to them and you sort of size them up, you get a sense of who they are by the way they're dressed or perhaps the way they speak, the things that they say. And then as you get to, and then you develop a bit of a judgment about them, or at least an image of them. And then as you get to learn more about them, you realize that there's a depth to this person. There's a history. There's so many layers to that person that makes them a much richer, much more interesting person to you than when you first met them. So with that in mind, I welcome you to this then and now presentation, and just keep those layers in mind because that's a lot of what the Grand Canyon is all about. So to start, I observed a group of middle school students boisterously approach Mather Point near the South Rim Visitor Center, and they're jabbering away as only young adolescents can. One boy was particularly loud, laughing, cracking jokes, completely unaware of his surroundings. When they reached the top of the stairs and caught their first glimpse of the vastness before them, the group stopped. They quieted as one. "Whoa," the boy mumbled. Try to describe the Grand Canyon. Verbal language is simply inadequate to the task. Even US President Teddy Roosevelt, who was known for his loquaciousness, was unable to do it. Here's his quote: "I could not choose words that would convey or could convey to any outside what the canyon is." Geologist Clarence Dutton wrote of the canyon, "Dimension means nothing to the senses, and all we are left with is a troubled sense of immensity." Joshua Rose, who's former editor of the American Art Collector magazine, suggests that perhaps the task is best left to the artist to respond emotionally in ways that only the visual arts can. So with Grand Canyon Then and Now, we've attempted to capture only a tiny slice of the magnitude that I just described. So even though a photograph may be worth 1,000 words, ours is simply a glimpse into time and light. I was trying to figure out, how do I describe what the Grand Canyon is all about? And it's really about time and light. So through these comparative photographs that we're going to look at, we take a peek into human and geologic history at the canyon, and perhaps moving a step closer to fathoming the sublimity of this place. Now, during this presentation, we're going to look at just a few of the photo pairs in each of 8 sections that are included in this Grand Canyon Then and Now exhibit on the National Park website. So I'm now going to go in, show you how to get to the place on the National Park website. So you go to the Learn About the Park, go to History and Culture, and then the, oops. Oh, I should not have clicked there. Hang on a second. Let's do that again. History and Culture, Grand Canyon Then and Now, and then click on that to get us to that page. So the first section is called Sacred Canyon. very important aspect about Grand Canyon is its sacredness. Now, as a white person, I've grappled with the idea of the Grand Canyon as a sacred place. Let me just go down a little bit more. I feel the canyon's power, especially as I descend into its interior. Let me show you a cool picture. And I experience the changing light, the texture of the rocks and soils, and the weather, of course. But my experience is only temporary. For the indigenous people of the canyon region, the rocks, trees, floods, and animals are all sacred and integral to who they are. As indigenous scholars Danielle Cooper and his colleagues wrote in 2019, our environments are our cultural identities, origins, religions, and worldviews. Now, personally, my sacred places are my family, my ancestors, and my environments. They define who I am, how I think, how I live my life in the world. In the same vein as Cooper and her colleagues note, in plain speak, to have a relationship with a place and to know this place for Indigenous Aboriginal people is similar to knowing and relating to one's family. So this gives you a sense of what the sacred is in the Indigenous Native American world. Really quite profound. Now, the presence of the Pi people in the Grand Canyon region dates back 20 to 25,000 years. For the Hualapai, Hopi, and Zuni, it is the location of their origin stories. For all of the 11 associated tribes of the Grand Canyon, it is definitely a sacred place. Now, as any student of American history knows, the post-contact history is one of betrayal, broken treaties, and forced relocations of indigenous peoples by the European Americans, and the commercialization of the Western idea of Indians. Think Roy Rogers and those kinds of TV shows. I have long been sickened by that history. However, the more modern history is one of re-empowerment of tribal organizations and reclaiming the ancestral land. At the Grand Canyon, this process has begun most notably with the Desert View Tribal Heritage Project, and I'm really hopeful for the future. Now, the first image we're going to look at is called Artisans at the Hopi House. And you notice this website has got this wonderful slider that goes back and forth. And I'll start with all these images with the historical photograph. This is from 1905. Now, this was, the Hopi House was intended to provide tourists with a sense of authenticity, where, in quotes, real Indians worked and lived. The Hopi House was built in 1905 by concessionaire the Fred Harvey Company and his partner, the Santa Fe Railroad. The designer Mary Coulter tried to create an atmosphere within the building where people could meet and interact with Native craftsmen and women and shop for souvenirs and supplies. It still kind of has that purpose. So in this historic photo, originally entitled Native Roof Garden Party, Hopi potter Nempeo and his family members posed for the camera. Let me show you my version of this. Oops. So I was there in January of 2023, which, as we will see later, turned out to be the second snowiest winter in history. And you may notice that the roof line is different in the modern photo. So that was clearly added on. You might see, look at the wood beams going across. Anyway, so that's what it looks like today. It's really beautiful to go see that. The second image we're going to look at is called Havasupai Workers Hauling the Kaibab Bridge Cable from 1928. And by the way, we're going to jump around a little bit because I have, I think, about 70 pairs of photographs here, and we're only going to see with this presentation about 25. So that's the way it goes. So the original Kaibab suspension bridge across the Colorado River was deemed inadequate after the park was founded for the safe crossing of traffic from the South Rim to Phantom Ranch and the North Rim. So to build the replacement bridge, mules carried 122 tons of materials down the 9 miles of the Kaibab Trail, South Kaibab Trail from the South Rim. But then the 1-ton, 550-foot-long bridge support cables were carried on the shoulders of 42 Havasupai workers down the very steep South Kaibab Trail. And here's an image of them doing that. Havasupai workers actually provided the bulk of the labor required to build much of the inner canyon infrastructure, particularly the backbreaking trail construction and maintenance. Now here's the image of that same spot today. And this gets up here in the top of it, got a little washed out because of the way the sun was shining. This photo's in the shadows. but you get a sense of what kind of has happened geologically since 1928 to today. Cool spot. Now, the last picture I'm going to show in this section is of the Desert View Watchtower construction in 1928. This is a very interesting location, built to mimic the remains of an abandoned Native American structure on Desert View Point. Both Mary Coulter and the Fred Harvey Company designed the Desert View Watchtower in Kiva to provide tourists with another authentic experience. A 1933 company brochure called the Watchtower in Kiva, in quotes, a recreation from remote past of the American Southwest, built in the heart of the prehistoric Indian country on the promontory that overlooks the wanderings of these ancient people. So on May 13th, 1933, the Watchtower and Kiva were blessed in an elaborate Hopi ceremony, but it was covered by 620 newspapers from 45 states, broadcast on the radio, and filmed for Paramount News. So there you see it under construction, and here's that same view today. Now the tower goes up another, 40, 50 feet or more from this location, and you get a sense of what it looked like then and what it looks like today. All right, now we're going to move to a different section now. This section is called the Explorers, Surveyors, and River Rats. Let me just get to a cool photo you can look at while I'm chatting away here. So in 1857, the United States War Department assigned a Lieutenant Joseph Christmas Ives to explore whether the Colorado River would be useful to transport troops and supplies to Utah to fight the Mormon War. Ives determined, this is great, Ives determined that the river to be unnavigable for military purposes and the region to be, in quotes, altogether valueless. It shall be forever unvisited and undisturbed, he said. It was an almost laughable historical miscalculation, of course. The indigenous people of this sometimes harsh and unforgiving region had established trails, farms, trade routes, and villages thousands of years before Ives came along and declared it unvisited. And tragically, over the next 80 years, the forces of manifest destiny, the search for rail routes, and the extraction of resources belied Ives' claim, overwhelming the Grand Canyon region's indigenous populations and ecosystems. So the first pair that I'm going to show for you is Powell's Boat and Chair at Little Nankoweap from 1872. Now, Union Army veteran John Wesley Powell's first expedition in 1869 down the Colorado River into the unknown, at least unknown to white people, of the Grand Canyon was intended to be a scientific expedition. However, faced with the threat of starvation after the loss of boats, food, and scientific equipment, it became a voyage of survival. But the successful second expedition in 1871-72 did turn out to be a truly scientific endeavor. Funded in part by Congress, Powell was able to secure better boats and better boatmen to complete a scientific study of the topography and geology of the land. He developed a watershed map of the American West that introduced the idea of sustainability and stewardship of the earth at a time when America's manifest destiny implied the riches of natural resources were there for the taking. Now, this is an image from today, actually a few years ago. And with this image, I want to thank Helen Fairley of the U.S. Geological Survey's Flagstaff office, who provided these Powell expedition photographs, at least this one, as part of the USGS's effort to document changes in the canyon since the completion of the Glen Canyon Dam, which we'll talk about in a little while. So this photo, I wanted to say a bit about it. To take a photo like this, expedition photographer Jack Hiller used something called the wet plate collodion process, which is kind of crazy because it meant he and an assistant had to transport a heavy box containing the darkroom, in addition to the large format camera with side-by-side lenses, bags of processing materials, chemicals, and fragile glass plates. So raging rapids, wind, rain, blowing sand, or an improper mix of chemicals could destroy hours or weeks of work in a flash. Amazing. The next image we're going to look at is of the Stanton expedition boats at Lee's Ferry in 1889. The Stanton expedition of 1889 was surveying possible routes for a rail line through the Grand Canyon to carry coal from the Rocky Mountains to San Diego. After a tragic first effort during which 3 men lost their lives shortly after departing from Lee's Ferry, which is where this photo was taken, Stanton regrouped with better boats and with better life jackets, finally reaching the Gulf of California in April of 1890. Of course, as we know, the railroad was never built. Here's the image from today. Notice the algae bloom. And also notice over here, you can see all these tamarisk trees. That's something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. It's an important part of the ecosystem, or the changes in the ecosystem, especially as a result of the Glen Canyon Dam. Now, this next one is one of my favorite stories in the Grand Canyon. We'll get there. Hang on, here it is. So this is the Neville's expedition at Lee's Ferry from 1938. I don't know if you can see that all right. Here we go. So Elzada Clover and Lois Jotter were the first botanists, and they're over on the left side of this photograph. They were the first botanists and the first white women to successfully run the canyon. The canyon was seen as an inappropriate place for women, especially traveling with men. Before the Glen Canyon Dam was built, it's important to understand that the river was very wild and unpredictable. During spring flooding, snowmelt thick with mud, followed by storm water from summer monsoons, carried boulders and debris that scoured canyons, really carved the canyons, and washed away beaches. The dam changed all that. Seasonal differences evaporated. There were no more huge floods or meager flows. The water was always 49 degrees Fahrenheit and hardly ever shrank during a drought. Clover and Jotter's comprehensive list of plants in the Grand Canyon from 1938 were the only ones published before the dam was built, and have become, of course, a critical source for understanding how ecosystems changed as a result of the dam. And I want to thank the Associated Press, by the way, for providing this photograph, this 1938 photo, and to Melissa Sevigny for her wonderful book about the Clover-Jotter expedition called Brave the Wild River. And here's the image from today. It's a beautiful location right at Lee's Ferry. This is where most people start their runs down the Colorado River, down the Grand Canyon, right here. All right, we're going to move on to another section that I call the rocks, miners, and moonshots. Let's get over there. All right, we'll start here. So the typical visitors to the Grand Canyon approach the rim and are overwhelmed by the dimensions of the panorama that opens before them. It's really too much for their brain to hold and comprehend. To my mind, the only way to even begin to comprehend what this so-called ditch is all about is to get down into it, to touch the rocks, which are a timeline of geologic history, to feel the thermoclines and the heat rise as one descends. You step across the dry streams and imagine boulders scouring the land, swept along by the floods that occasionally rush down the canyons. There's a debate among geologists about how the canyon was formed. It has in recent years, though, settled around a theory that for about 4 million years ago, a dome on the Earth's crust called the Kaibab upwarp lifted like a bubble, kind of higher than the surrounding terrain. As the theory goes, the Colorado River, which already existed in the same locale, cut through the rising landscape, exposing layers of rock from around 1.7 billion years ago at the river near Phantom Ranch to only 270 million years old in the Kaibab Formation near the South Rim Visitor Center. For an excellent and very readable overview of the geology of the canyon, I recommend Wayne Raney's book, Carving the Canyon, which I'm showing here. I don't know if you can see it. Wayne is the president of the Grand Canyon Historical Society and is with us on this call tonight. Great book. You're welcome, Wayne. And I just want to say, early European American explorers who descended into the canyon, either on ancient trails or on boats, they found evidence of mineral wealth or scientific mystery too promising to ignore. But their quest for riches of understanding led men and women to take extraordinary risks in this unforgiving land. And the rich geology of the canyon placed it smack in the center of the Cold War, which we'll learn about, while bringing inspiration and technical training to those who would walk on the moon. And we'll talk about that. So this first pair of photos is Eddie McKee, naturalist Eddie McKee at the Yavapai Museum from 1932. So as I mentioned, geologists have for a long time debated the formation of the canyon and struggled to communicate their understandings to the visiting public. One of the earliest to master this skill was Edwin McKee. McKee served as park naturalist for 11 years, during which time he wrote the groundbreaking Ancient Landscapes of the Grand Canyon region, which experienced 30 revised printings until 1985. At the end of his term in 1940, the National Park Service transferred him, this is amazing to me, to Yosemite National Park, but he refused that assignment, hard to believe for a Californian, and resigned instead. He became assistant director of the Museum of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff and served as the head of the Department of Geology at the University of Arizona. He's a seminal figure in Grand Canyon history. Now, I mentioned the Cold War. So this is a really crazy circumstance. This is the proposed hotel at the Orphan Mine from 1961. So not ancient history, but very interesting history. So in 1951, this is something I never knew about this. High-grade uranium was discovered at the Orphan Mine along the south rim, not far from the village. After a few years of uranium mining, and this was, by the way, private property within the boundaries of the national park. So the mine's owner, Western Gold Mining Company, determined that the uranium ore body extended underground beyond the private property boundary into the national park. But federal mining laws disallowed mining within the boundaries of the park. But Western Gold sought to receive exemptions to the laws and gain support from both of Arizona's U.S. senators and local tribal leaders. But the approval process moved very slowly. Impatient, as a publicity stunt to stir outrage among the public, Western Gold proposed to build an 18-story, 600-room hotel flowing over the edge of the rim. That's an image, this was the image that was publicized of that hotel. And it worked. Letters poured in against the hotel, but not against the mine, interestingly enough. And in 1962, President John F. Kennedy signed the Orphan Mine Bill, allowing mining under public land for a specified time. Now, in 1987, National Park Service removed most physical remnants of the mine, but contamination from radiation, low-level contamination, remained. And here's that same site today during the wintertime. And you can't see it in this image, but over on the left, there is the shaft for the mine. And if you look down below it, you can't see it again in this image, sorry, but there's remnants of equipment from the mine. So here's what the hotel was proposed to be, and here's what it looks like today. This is a view from the trail out to Powell Point. So the next one we're going to see, and the last one from this section, is the Apollo astronauts riding on the Bright Angel Trail. Amazing that this happened. So in 1964, to inspire a group of jet pilots, NASA brought 3 groups of Apollo astronauts to the Grand Canyon to learn about geological principles and techniques and how to read the rocks and use that knowledge on flights to the moon. 11 of the 12 Apollo astronauts who set foot on the moon, including Neil Armstrong, participated in the training. Geologist and naturalist Eddie McKee, who we talked about previously, briefed the astronauts at the Yavapai Geology Museum. These astronauts got practice reading geological maps and identifying topographic features from aerial photos. They received special permission to use geology pick hammers to chip away at the rocks, which of course is not allowed in the national parks. The group hiked down the South Kaibab Trail, spent the night at Phantom Ranch, and hiked up the Bright Angel Trail the next day. Some rode mules from Havasupai Gardens, formerly known as Indian Gardens, but some more competitive personalities like Alan Shepard decided to walk out. And here's the view from today. This is actually a view from the Kolb residence, from one of the windows of the dark room, for those who know that place, right near the top of the Bright Angel Trail. Very cool spot. And I wish I could identify for you which one of these is Neil Armstrong, but I cannot at this moment. Anyway, we'll move on. I'm going to move on to a section that's called Building the National Park. And, you know, most of us who visit national parks in the United States, we're pretty used to oh, by the way, this is a picture of John Muir and John Burroughs on the South Rim. Anyway, we're pretty used when we visit national parks to a certain infrastructure and facilities that we can use. Well, back in 1919, when the Grand Canyon was established, more than half a century had passed since it had been discovered, in quotes, by the first European Americans. There hadn't been much in the way of regulation or facilities built. As a result, forests were cut down, mining despoiled ecosystems, and indigenous inhabitants were either killed or removed. Fortunately, the writings of John Wesley Powell and the paintings of such artists as Thomas Moran and Gunnar Windforce brought national attention to the sublimity of this canyon. A railroad to the South Rim was built, as were fine hotels, and the first automobiles traversed the plateau to the canyon edge. As annual visitation has increased from 38,000 when the park opened in 1919 to 108,000 5 years later to 4.7 million in 2023, park administrators, most notably Superintendent Minor Tillotson, who served for 16 years from 1922, have had to remain nimble as they built infrastructure, negotiated with concessionaires, and responded to the changing national political climate. Today, visitors have access to a broad range of experiences, from luxury, well, national park style luxury, to the most rugged, dangerous wilderness. So the first picture we're going to look at is a horse crossing the Kaibab Suspension Bridge around 1921. I mentioned this bridge earlier when we talked about the Havasupai workers carrying the cables down. As the challenges of mining in the canyon became too great, the number of tourists arriving increased. They needed facilities and conveyances to provide the expected comfort. Once the national park was established, the NPS decided to build a suspension bridge near Bright Angel Creek to benefit tourism, but also improve fire control and wildlife management on the North Rim. It replaced the cable and winch system built in 1907 by David Rust that moved a large cage across the Colorado. It could carry one mule or three or several humans. I think I saw a picture with 3 or 4 humans in it. And here's the picture today. You notice that the existing bridge is higher than the old suspension bridge. And of course, the Colorado River in its muddy form. So imagine trying to cross that bridge as the mule is crossing it. Cool spot. All right, the next one we're going to look at, there's a lot of beautiful images here, by the way, but we can't do them all, is Civilian Conservation Corps men hanging the Trans-Canyon telephone line in 1935. This is a really well-known photograph. It was very difficult to find this location, by the way. So during the 1934-35 season, the Civilian Conservation Corps built the Trans-Canyon telephone line. It was strung from tree to rock and was frequently out of commission. Often workers had to dangle from ropes on cliffs to install poles in the cliff sides. The line provided instantaneous communication between the north and south rims, but could handle only one call at a time. And here is the location today. This is, by the way, right above the Indian Gardens or the Havasupai Gardens campground. But it's not recommended you go try searching for this because it is damaging to the ecosystem. But I had to do it to get this photo. All right, we're now going to look at a weather-related photo. Shoveling snow on the Bright Angel Trail. This is somewhere around 1949. Well, it snows less than 1 inch on the average at Phantom Ranch, which is about 2,400 feet in elevation near the Colorado River. The North Rim, which is at 8,300 feet, averages 142 inches of snow per year, with a record snowfall of 273 inches in 1978. The South Rim, which is where this photo is taken, this is the Bright Angel Trail, at 7,000 feet elevation, averages 58 inches of snow. After heavy snowfalls on the most popular hiking trails, such as the Bright Angel or the South Kaibab, trail crews have to dig out the path. In the 2022-23 season, the winter season, the North Rim received 228 inches of snow, and the North Rim received 148 inches of snow, believed to be the second snowiest winter on record. Now that's when I was there. It was in January of 23, and this is what it looked like after some people had spent some time traipsing down the trail. This is right near the top of the trail. So the next section we're going to look at, this is section number 5 of 8. It's called Tourism for the Rugged. Let me just get to a great spot. This is actually the Kolb Studios in 1904. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's a really cool image. So one of the most enjoyable aspects of creating this then and now exhibit is to stand in the exact location a historic photographer stood and to try to imagine what they saw and heard, what they were thinking, and how they felt. Of course, the modern visitor can come and go with relative ease and comfort, but not so with those who arrived around the turn of the 20th century. Their journeys were long and arduous. The first image we're going to look at is this down at the bottom of Bright Angel Trail of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce in 1906. So thought leaders John Muir and Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., and Olmsted, you may know, was the architect of New York Central Park, but also much of San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Anyway, they emphasized the economic benefits of grand scenery, untrammeled and unaffected by humans. The railroads and chambers of commerce were also interested in promoting the parks as playgrounds for people and as tourist magnets. So groups like the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce endured challenging trips across the deserts to see for themselves how they might support businesses in their own communities as they sought to provide access to such remarkable places as the Grand Canyon. And here's what that same location at the bottom of the Bright Angel Trail looks like today. So that hasn't changed too much. You can see a little bit more of the tamarisk trees. These are an invasive species that normally the flow would have wiped out, but of course the Glen Canyon Dam changed all that. All right, the next one we're going to look at is of the first airplane that landed in the Grand Canyon, and that was in 1922. As soon as the park opened in 1919, as I mentioned before, airplanes started flying over the park and pressure mounted to allow commercial sightseeing flights. National Park Service Director Stephen Mather had mixed thoughts about it, acknowledging the value for firefighting and administrative purposes, but concerned about safety and, of course, disruption to the peace and serenity of the park experience. So in August 1922, pilot R.V. Thomas, with Ellsworth Kolb as cameraman, flew in from Williams and made the first landing and takeoff within the canyon at Turtle Head, a promontory on the Tonto platform, which was on the way to Plateau Point. He returned 10 days later with a Fox Weekly Motion Picture Company cameraman. And this, again, was a wintertime shot. That's what it looks like today with the rim covered with snow, which is really beautiful. And that's what it looked like back in 1922. Beautiful location. If you go down there, I do recommend going out to Plateau Point. It is a truly spectacular view. The next image we're going to look at is one of my favorite characters, and that's Georgia White at the Pariah Riffle. So there are a number of interesting characters who populate the canyon's early tourist history, including John Hance, Ralph Cameron, the Kolb brothers, and David Rust. But one in particular who captured my imagination was Georgie White, who was the first European American to row the full length of the canyon. She was a cross-country bicyclist, a women's auxiliary Air Force pilot during World War II. First married at age 16, she became the first woman to operate a commercial rafting service on the river. In 1954, she assembled rafts of big black Army assault pontoon boats tied together. The rafts had a small motor to power during long periods of still water. They were very popular, opening the canyon to the less wealthy and technically skilled people. I love this. Typically, she dressed in a leopard print bathing suit and a red mesh t-shirt. She named her customers the Royal River Rats and broke an egg over their heads in an initiation ceremony before each trip. So here she is on the Pariah Riffle, and that's that same riffle today. Not easy to find this exact location, but there she was. All right, moving on to section 6, rails and roads. Right, this is an image of the first automobile in the Grand Canyon or Grand View Point. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's a beautiful view. As a tourist, getting around the South Rim at the Grand Canyon these days is pretty darn easy. You have excellent roads to get to fantastic views and hikes. In the village, you don't even need a car because you can walk or take a frequent bus. Such was definitely not the case in the early 1900s. For the mostly white Americans and Europeans who chose to make the journey, they faced jarring, hardscrabble roads and trails. The rugged travel modes of stagecoach and horseback was replaced around the turn of the 20th century by the smooth luxury of railroad adventures. But shortly thereafter, the advent of the automobile increased the need for more facilities, roads, and trails. but trains and automobiles could only bring the tourists to the edge of the canyon. To experience the totality of what the Grand Canyon has to offer, visitors still had to hike down and back up, don't forget that, steep rocky trails, or jump on a boat and navigate the rapids of the Great Colorado River. I'm going to show you this image, a very famous one, of the Metz car at El Tovar Point in 1914. This car was driven by Mr. L. Wing of the Metz Advertising Agency in Los Angeles. This is a great story. He drove this Metz 22 Speedster from Los Angeles across mountain ranges through blowing, this is 1914, I point out, through blowing sands, navigating jagged lava, often without a road of any sort. The goal was to drive to the bottom of the canyon, but first stop was the edge of the El Tovar Point. He drove right to the edge and didn't put on his brakes, so the legend goes, until the front wheels were right at the precipice. The next day, he drove to Peach Springs to the west of this area and began his descent. The grade was as much as 25 to 30%, driving over deposits of debris and boulders. He successfully completed his adventure, including his return to Los Angeles, without breaking a single part of his car. Pretty amazing. So I mentioned train travel. Here's the train yard in the El Tovar in 1915. So the first train from Williams to the South Rim was on September 17th, 1901. At the behest of the U.S. Forest Service, the railway company partnered with the Fred Harvey Company to supply lodging and food. They built buildings, provided power and water, and maintained all facilities. The railroad also contracted with ranchers to move stock, loggers to move lumber, and with the orphan mine to transport uranium in the 50s. Here's that same image today. This is a difficult one to get the right perspective on, but there it is. That's the El Tovar Hotel in the background. You can see it on the upper right. Many of those buildings have long been demolished, but that's the view from today and yesterday. By the way, if you haven't been there during the winter with the snow, it is a truly fantastic place and time to visit, and much less crowded than summertime. Navajo Bridge. This is a very interesting spot. This is the Navajo Bridge dedication celebration in 1929. So the Colorado River, as you can imagine, is a huge barrier to travel. High cliffs and a dangerous river crossing led to unmitigated isolation in the Grand Canyon region. The ferry system in present-day Lee's Ferry provided pioneers and their wagons a way to get across the river, but when wagon trains were replaced with automobiles, pressure mounted to build a bridge. Despite its remote location, for the dedication ceremony of the Navajo Bridge, 7,000 people, this is 1929, and 1,200 automobiles came to celebrate. And it's a long way to get there, let me tell you. It is now one of only 7 land crossings of the Colorado River for 750 miles. So here's that same location today. You'll notice this is the old bridge to the left, and there's a new bridge to the right that was built much more recently because the old bridge was no longer safe for the load of traffic that crosses it on a daily basis. So this is during the celebration. You can see the band in the foreground celebrating, and this is the current location, the current image of the 2 bridges. So we're going to jump to our last major section, or this more historical section, that's tourism designs for the leisure class. This is the view of the Bright Angel Hotel back in, 1898. Again, we're not going to look at that one, but it's good to see it. When Grand Canyon National Park was established in 1919, there were 6.7 million automobiles registered in the United States. By 1930, that number had more than tripled to over 23 million. And just for reference, today there are 283.4 million automobiles registered in the US. So back then it was clearly the age of the automobile. And what a change the automobile brought to the canyon. Visitation increased 450% in that same 11-year period as the car overtook the train as the most popular way to travel to the park. It became much easier for families to escape from their busy lives and take vacations to such distant places as the Grand Canyon. And visitors expected more of their park. They wanted better hotels, more roads, and more of the comforts of home. They came not only to stand in awe, but also to have fun, to escape, and to be with family and friends. So this image gives you a great example of that. This is the woman on Grand View Point. This is actually from 1905, so before the park was formed. But there are only a few spots along the rim and within the canyon where railings protect visitors from falling as you look at this and imagine being up there. Otherwise, people who venture too closely to the edge are easily exposed to potentially lethal falls. So since the 1800s, about 900 people have died in the park. And the majority, as Tom talked earlier about, were from airplane or helicopter crashes, including 128 who died in the 1956 United Airlines TWA crash out near Desert View. But the number two most common cause is either falling or heat and hydration related issues. Each has tallied about 200 to 250 fatalities since the park was opened. On average, 2 to 3 people die each year from falls off of cliffs. Now, the modern day image of this, I want you to notice how the pinnacle on the right has collapsed. It's no longer there. This is a great example of how the canyon is always changing. There you go. All right, the next image we're going to look at is of Mary Coulter and Don Hirschborn at Desert View. Oh, by the way, this is a picture of Albert Einstein, the Hopi House in 1931, posing in Plains Indian garb, which of course is not relevant to the Grand Canyon region, but that's the way it went at those days. Okay, here we are with Mary Coulter and Don Hirschborn at Desert View, and this is 1932. Excuse me. Don Hirschborn was the contractor at the Desert View Watchtower project, and Mary Coulter its designer. Now, Mary Coulter was a very interesting figure. At a time when very few women were licensed as architects, Mary Coulter is generally known as the architect of the El Tovar Hotel, Phantom Ranch, Hermit's Rest, and the Desert View Tower. And the Hopi, she actually designed the interior of the Hopi the structure. She worked primarily for the Fred Harvey Company and the Santa Fe Railroad. At the Grand Canyon, she designed buildings using local materials to blend with their surroundings and often embraced Native American motifs. Now, there is some controversy about whether Coulter was actually the architect of the Grand Canyon buildings credited to her. But both the U.S. Forest Service and the old Fred Harvey staff architect, Alvin Teal, they gave Coulter credit for design of a number of buildings to the Grand Canyon. One of the confusing elements is that in general, back in those days, individual architects were not given credit, just the group was given credit. So what she exactly designed is still a little bit unknown, but she was given a lot of credit for a lot of the designs. So I just wanted to make that point. And here's that same view from Desert View today. This gorgeous view looking to the northeast. Back then and today. All right. Last one we're going to look at in this section is the African American Green Book Tour from 1956. As you know, if you visited national parks, and I'm sure you all have, they serve as places of refuge from the trials of American life. But for African Americans, traveling around the country was a challenge, even today, but certainly back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, to say the least. Many businesses were off limits to Black patrons. Hotels and restaurants often refused them service. So Victor Green created a travel guide for African Americans in 1936 called the Green Book. There's a movie made about it. It was published until 1966, highlighting lodging, restaurants, and fuel stations that would serve African Americans, kind of a roadmap for safe travel. Both the Bright Angel Lodge and the El Tovar Hotel were listed in the Green Book, as were accommodations in many other national parks. Oops. Here's an image from today. And I was pleased that a group of African American visitors were willing to pose for this shot. Wouldn't be right to have some white visitors posing for this shot. Anyway, great shot, great place. Now, we're going to move to the last section. And I love this section. I love them all, but this one is particularly different. So it's artistic interpretation. Now, as I stated in the introduction to this presentation, there just aren't the words to describe the magnitude of time and light that is the Grand Canyon. It's an ever-changing landscape. Shadow angles adjust to the sun as it moves across the sky. Storm clouds multiply dimensions. Dust and smoke cast a haze that softens the jagged edges of the temples and the thrones in the distance. In that context, it is the artist's task to interpret and capture the mood, the scale, and the texture of the canyon. Quite an enviable task. Now, this painting was done by Thomas Moran in 1920, and I didn't really focus on it for this presentation because Moran had this strategy or technique of combining images from a number of different locations in the park to sort of create this romantic version of the park. So we're not going to spend time here. But this image, this painting called Grand Canyon from Hopi Point from 1926 was painted by Gunnar Widforss, really important painter in the national park in Grand Canyon. So according to Museum of Northern Arizona fine art curator Alan Peterson, Gunnar Widforss may be the Grand Canyon painter par excellence. Unlike most other artists working in the Grand Canyon, he painted many scenes from within the depths of the canyon. He lived and painted in the canyon for a number of years, but in 1934, a doctor warned him that he had a serious heart condition and urged him to move from the Grand Canyon to a lower elevation. So he returned to the canyon to retrieve his belongings and say goodbye to friends. But sadly, while driving from the El Tovar to the Bright Angel Lodge, he had a heart attack and died at age 55. At least he died in the Grand Canyon. So I guess that's a positive. So beautiful painting. Look at the color and the light on this. And this is my photograph of it from a different time of day, different, haze in the canyon, very different image, but look how beautiful that is. I like his better, frankly. So this next image, you may recognize this painter. This is Glen Canyon Dam, painted in 1969 by Norman Rockwell. You may know him as a painter that was featured on 400 covers of the Saturday Evening Post. In 1969, he was invited by the Bureau of Reclamation to paint the Glen Canyon Dam, that's Lake Powell behind there, for display in the dam's visitor center. But he claimed, I'm a people person, not a landscape painter. So a local Navajo family was invited to be in the painting, a very ironic choice, because when the dam was completed in 1963, it flooded numerous Navajo cultural sites of significance, including the confluence of the San Juan and Colorado rivers, which are considered to be the birthplace of moisture by the Navajo people. The dam threatened also the Navajo Nation's access to water that was guaranteed by an 1868 treaty that established a federal trust responsibility to protect water rights for the tribe. Those rights were affirmed or verified by the Supreme Court in 1908 in Winters versus the United States government, and affirmed again in 2021 by the Ninth District Court of Appeals. However, and of course, there's always a however when we talk about Native American history in this country, the Ninth District's decision was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court in March of 2023, so just a year ago, claiming that the federal government is not obligated to assure tribal access to water. So this is a view from today. It was very hot when I took this picture. Reminded me of the importance of hydration when you're out in the desert. Still a beautiful sight if you're okay with dams. This next view we're going to look at, I just love this painting. It's called Fresh Snow on Yaqui Point from 2013 by Amory Bowling. She described to me how she is captivated by the Grand Canyon's, in quotes, vastness, complexity, and transcendent light. Of fresh snow at Yaqui Point, she writes, the sky was constantly changing, sometimes completely gray and socked in, sometimes partly cloudy, with the occasional ray of light passing through the clouds. I had to rely on my memory of the view because the best stuff, the light on the cliffs, the moving clouds, my sense of wonder is visually fleeting. The other trick is catching the light before the sun goes down and both the paint and your fingers begin to freeze. It is wintertime after all. Fortunately, I was there right around the same time of year and was able to capture this photograph. I love how she just has this real literal exactness to her painting that I was able to capture in the photo. Now, the opposite of that is this painting by Michelle Condrat called The Perfect Storm. Now, she's from Salt Lake City. She paints in what some call a digital or architectural style due to the layering of her linear and blended paint strokes. As she said to me, it's the layers of rock that fade into the distance, the clouds that roll above the canyon, giving drama to the sky, and the trees and vegetation that are symbols of hope and life. She's really honored to paint the canyon, and she says, using my art as a tool to show people how special and sacred it is. There's that sacred word. I want to remind people how important it is to preserve and protect places like the Grand Canyon. Now, notice this painting was done at sunset. This photograph was taken pretty close to sunrise, so I can really show the features of the area. Completely different lighting, of course, but same location. Pretty beautiful. Now, the last image I'm going to show you, I just have to show you this. We're not going to really spend time on it, but just gives you a sense of the different perspectives that different artists had. This is by Buffalo Kabinski from Moran Point. Cool spot. Anyway, this painting, though, it's called Edge of a Shadow by Dawn Sutherland. So she's from Flagstaff, Dawn is, and she told me painting outdoors uniquely captures the depth, definition, and feeling of the landscape before me. I feel there is almost always a near perfect composition provided by nature. Sometimes a scene calls out loudly to be painted. Sometimes I hear only a whisper. These are the images that find their way to my heart and my canvas. A great color and light. But when I was there taking a picture of it, quite a different, similar time of day, right before the sunset. Look at the shadows and the casts that they show. But it does get to be this kind of color too, depending upon how the light is in the haze and how it filtered through the haze. I was there on a very clear day, so there wasn't that kind of filtering, but just beautiful location. And I had to do this with quite a telephoto. Anyway, so I want to show you something in conclusion that I need to go back to this section. This is a very fun image that I call Everybody is a Photographer. Everybody's a photographer. So the quality of cameras on cell phones these days makes everyone a photographer. But imagine the lengths to which the photographers profiled in this presentation had to go to get their shots. Jack Hillers with the Powell's second expedition, Eugene LaRue with the Bird's Eye expedition, and the Kolb brothers over a many-year period demonstrated a verve and a nerve that I just don't think I would have been capable of as they lugged their equipment around and produced photos that provide us with a beautiful periscope into time gone by. As I traipsed around trying to find the right spot to replicate these historic photos, hiking rugged trails, traversing cliff edges, some with 300 to 500-foot drops, and scrambling through underbrush and with acacia bushes tearing up my arms and legs, I'm left with complete admiration and appreciation of the work of these photographers and artists. And as with nearly every aspect of my experience in the Grand Canyon, I am humbled. I am humbled. So that's it. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing. And Tom, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Ted. I'm going to just indicate if anyone has any questions, please type them in the chat. We have been answering questions as you've been speaking, Ted, and they're very basic questions about, for example, Beth Cook asked where the first airplane landed, and we have clearly a lot of historians on this call. So Wayne responded that it was landed on the Tonto platform about 3/4 of the way down into the canyon.
Right.
We have a compliment from Martha McCabe, thanking you for this extraordinary presentation. And I wanted to let everyone know again that we'll be posting the link to this presentation sometime tomorrow. It's basically in a cloud system, and we'll just have the link to that video. So please, anyone that has any questions for Dr. Ted, now's your chance to type them in. We welcome, of course, any questions, but we also would like to thank everyone for attending this evening and invite anyone who happens to be interested in joining the Historical Society to please do so. If you would like to sample more of what you saw tonight, we invite you to the picnic on Saturday. which will be at Shoshone Point, about a mile and a half on the way to Desert View. It's just past the visitors. You turn at the visitor center on the way to Desert View, and you'll be there. So, without any further questions, I want to ask Wayne if he would like to say a couple of words, or we just sign off. Wayne?
I have a question.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, Ted. You mentioned 3 times that it was very difficult for you to match up the photograph with the particular image of years ago. How did you solve that problem? Did you go to show the photo around and then ask experts exactly where that was, or how'd you do that?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, for the question. It depended upon the image. Some of them were quite easy to find. The Grand Canyon has such scale and depth to it, but there's a lot of really well-known physical features that provide backdrops for a lot of the images that I was searching for. So I could triangulate those locations. Sometimes I would be in one place and I'd think I was lined up, but in fact I was a couple miles away from where the actual location was. But I was also able to use such incredibly modern tools like Google Earth, to sort of fly in to get some basic orientation of where things might be and see how the different background physical features lined up. But oftentimes to find the pretty close to exact spot, I just had to kind of meander around for quite some time. In fact, my darling wife, Mary, won't join me on these because she gets annoyed with my wandering around so much and really going nowhere. But I had to do that in order to find the right location. But thanks for that question, Jerry.
Thank you. There are a few other questions, Ted. So Maureen Parton has asked, wonderful Dr. T, what effort does the National Park Service put towards helping to reduce human impacts on this marvelous setting? That might be more of a rhetorical question, but take a stab at it.
Well, that's a great question. And I really want to give a big shout out to the National Park Service. They've, in my experience with them, both at Grand Canyon and all the parks I've been working at, especially in the last decade, they've been making huge efforts to restore a large part of the formerly destroyed, if you will, areas that were used for national park infrastructure, Park Service infrastructure, such as parking lots and various structures of various sorts. They've been removing them, restoring them to their natural habitats, and letting them grow in a more natural fashion. So I think it's been a big move to do that in recent decades, which I'm really excited to see.
Thanks. Mia Monroe made the comment to everyone, love your then and now format, how it was presented. Thank you, Ted. So it's a note of gratitude.
Well, let me shout out to Mia. Mia is a recently retired ranger in the Golden Gate Natural Recreation Area at Muir Woods. She is one of the outstanding servants in the National Park Service. So
you brought your fan club with you, Ted. So we're really expecting a big burst of new members.
I hope they join. It's a fantastic organization. So please send in your $35, right? That's what it is.
$35. It's really easy. You can do it online. You can use a credit card. It's a piece of cake.
Yeah, do it.
And by the way, I wanted to mention, I kind of fumbled where the money goes. I want to be more specific. One of our activities is to support research grants, and we have we have a research grant every spring that we award. It's a couple $1,000s. It's to help with the costs of doing the kind of research you're doing, which you're doing out of your pocket. You're doing it on your own. Others need assistance to do this kind of work, so we help them based on their proposals.
Right.
And then, of course, Larry Pensack has asked, how do you find the exact locations to match the historical photos? Well, you kind of explained that.
Yeah, it's an adventure. There was one that I was trying to find of Buffalo Bill and John Hance. There's a very famous photograph that I got pretty scratched up and I never found the location, but I did find an old, by doing that and, risking life and limb, don't tell my wife that. I did find an old ruin, which was pretty amazing from, I don't know how many hundreds of years ago that I reported to the Park Service for their research capacity. Anyway, yeah, you do a lot of traipsing around, Larry.
Allison Shepherd, I was almost ready to say Alan Shepherd, picking up on what you said earlier. Allison has given you a compliment, a great presentation. Love the photos, the history, the insight, your insights. Looking forward to viewing the whole project online. And then Jonathan Maurer also extended a compliment. I know you can't look at the compliments that easily because you're trying to, you're trying to speak and present. Kim Christensen also made compliments, a very interesting perspective of Grand Canyon's history. Thank you. Beth Cook also said thank you again. You've got me. I'm going to go to the website that you just showed because there's a lot of content there I never knew about.
No, there is.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
I only showed about a third of the content that's up there. It's an incredible story. There's so much fascinating history and fun history, dark history. It's quite
Sure.
I recommend people check it out.
Owner, and I'm not sure whether owner is the name of the person or it's the way that they've identified themselves. Great job, Ted. Wonderful photos and lots of historical information. Thanks for sharing. Jerry Courtney has also, he and Lisa love the presentation. He's on screen, so he already asked a few questions. Glenn B., thanks very much for sharing your perspectives here, both photographic and narrative. Very, very enjoyable, both aspects. Jonathan Maurer again has said, how do we find your other then and now presentations? That's to you, Ted. I don't know if you know Jonathan Maurer, but if you want to respond and give us a clue on how we could find your other comparative, like Death Valley or Yosemite, et cetera.
Yeah. It's actually pretty easy. When I started the presentation, I navigated there from the Grand Canyon website. If you go to any of those parks, so that's Yosemite, Death Valley, Redwood National Park, Point Reyes, Golden Gate, you go to the Things to Learn tab, which all of them have that. It's either under multimedia or history and culture.
So you're a contributor to the Park Service content then. That's the take home that I don't think I realized. So, really bravo. Kudos to you.
Thank you. That was a great project. And one of the great things is during the pandemic, I was working at Yosemite and was one of the few people allowed into the park when it was closed to the public, because I just had to get in there with the waterfalls when it was closed, which was a great honor.
All right. If there's no other questions, I'm going to stop the recording. And it's Jerry just said it's under history and culture would be at a particular park. It would be under that heading.
Or Grand Canyon,
right? For Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
To navigate to any other national park, it's very easy. The website is always nps.gov, and then there's a slash with the first 4 letters or the first 2 letters of a 2-named park. And it's very easy to navigate any of these. Ted, that was a wonderful presentation. At our symposium last year, you were limited to 20 minutes. We're so glad to get this more fleshed out version of it. Thank you so much.
I'm very delighted, and thanks for the opportunity, Wayne.